For do now number 3, we want to mark the diagram and determine which method will prove the triangle's congruent. So for our given, we have V is the midpoint of RU. That means that RU is getting cut into 2 congruent pieces, which means that RV is going to be congruent to VU. You're also given that angle R is congruent to angle U, and that's the only thing that you're given right now. Again, without anything else, the only other thing that you can assume here is a pair of vertical angles, which would be this angle, which would be congruent to that angle. And again, that would be congruent by angle, side, angle. So angle, side, angle is the method that would be used there. So please don't forget you're going to have a quiz after this section, which is 3-4, and we're going to concentrate again on more triangle proofs. And again, keep in mind that there are 5 ways to prove triangles congruent. That is never going to change. We have side, angle, side, angle, side, angle, side, 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 angle, angle, side, and hypotenuse, leg. There is no such thing as angle, angle, angle. Okay, you can't have 3 angles congruent and prove that the triangles are congruent. You can't have side, side, angle. We've talked about that. And again, if you want to be literal here and you take that and you flip it around and you spell it the other way, same thing. You cannot have that. Okay, you're a beep. It's just not going to work. Okay, so you don't want to be a beep. So you can't prove triangles congruent that way. Okay, so given that PQ is congruent to ST and that QR is congruent to RT and R is the midpoint of PS, we want to prove that triangle PQR is congruent to triangle STR. So again, I need to set up a statements and reasons here. And again, the first thing that is always going into your proof is your givens. So given, I have PQ is congruent to ST and QR is congruent to RT. And I'm also told that R is the midpoint of PS. All that I know is true because it's given. And eventually our goal, again, is to prove that these 2 triangles are congruent. So let's mark the 2 things that I know that are congruent right from statement number 1. So PQ is congruent to ST and QR is congruent to RT. And then we're going to get our next line from the fact that R is the midpoint of PS. If R is the midpoint of PS, that means PS is getting cut into 2 congruent pieces, or more specifically, PR is going to be congruent to RS. And the whole reason for that is because that R is a midpoint. That's the that's not 3, that's 2, sorry. That's the definition of a midpoint. All right, so now I have enough information to prove the triangle's congruent. Again, I have a side, and a side. So for 3, I'm going to say that my triangle PQR is congruent to triangle STR. And again, that's because of side, side, side. For example number 2, we have angle A is congruent to angle D, and AC is congruent to DF. We are also told that AC is perpendicular to CB and that DF is perpendicular to FE, and we want to prove the 2 triangles congruent. So again, I'm going to set up my statements and reasons. First thing that is always going into the statement side is your given. So I have quite a few givens here. I have angle A is congruent to angle D. I have AC is congruent to DF, and I have AC is perpendicular to CB, and DF is perpendicular to FE. And all that I know is true because it's given. So again, let's mark some stuff off in our picture from that given. I have, again, angle A is congruent to angle D, and side AC is congruent to side DF. Okay, so now what I need to do is I need to use this piece of information here to get the other thing that I will need. Okay, so I have AC is perpendicular to CB and DF is perpendicular to FE. Perpendicular lines intersect to form right angles. And in the end, I know that all right angles are congruent. So I just can't leave anything to your imagination. So the first thing I'm going to say is that I have my right angles, and then I'm going to tell you that my right angles are going to be congruent. So for 2, I'm going to have angle C and angle F are right angles. And again, the reason that that is because of definition of perpendicular lines. Okay, and now that I know that they're right angles, now I can tell you that they're congruent. So angle C is congruent to angle F because right angles are congruent, okay, which means now that this angle is congruent to that angle, and I should have enough information now to prove my triangle's congruent. I have an angle, I have a side, and I have an angle. So triangle ACB is congruent to triangle DFE, and again, that's because of angle, side, angle. So for number 3, I'm given that angle M is congruent to angle K, and that WM is parallel to RK, and I want to again prove those two triangles are congruent. So once again, let's start with our statements and reasons, and let's get rid of our givens. So angle M is congruent to angle K, and WM is parallel to RK. Why do I know that? Because it was given. Okay, so they already have marked off in the picture for me the angle M and the angle K. And again, this is an arrow. That's not a hash mark. So those two sides are not congruent. Those arrows mean that the sides are parallel. That is it. And again, that's from this part here. Okay, so now I need to come up with a couple different things here in order to prove that these two triangles are congruent. Hey, if this is parallel to this, then this is going to be the transversal that's going to cut those pair of parallel lines. Okay, and that is going to make this angle congruent, I'm going to do 2 hash marks, congruent to that angle. Why? Because those are alternate interior angles, and alternate interior angles are congruent. So now I just have to put that into my statements and reasons. So let's talk about the two angles that are congruent. So that's going to be angle MWR is going to be congruent to angle WRK. And the reason is because alternate interior angles are congruent. So now I have two angles, and the next thing that I'm going to use, again, these two triangles share a common side here. Anytime that they share a common anything, we're going to use the reflexive property. So the reflexive property, again, we're talking about the side that they share there. That's WR. So WR is going to be congruent to itself, and that's because of the reflexive property. And again, I'll put an X through that. And again, this time I'm going to have an angle, and a side. So I have enough information to prove the triangle's congruent now. So triangle WMR is congruent to triangle RKW, and the reason being because of angle, side. Okay, 2 more. Okay, so I'm given that AB is congruent to BC and that BD bisects angle ABC. And again, we want to prove that triangle ABD is congruent to triangle CBD. Okay, so again, I'm going to have my statements and my reasons. Hey, as you get into this more and further into it, and these triangles are going to start overlapping and the pictures are going to get a little bit more funky, might be helpful to have two different colors. I'm just trying to save time, so that's why I'm not highlighting the triangles right now. They're pretty straightforward, but eventually the color is going to help you. Okay, so AB is congruent to BC, and BD bisects angle ABC. And the reason I know that's true is because it's given. So let's mark off our AB congruent to BC. And now let's talk about this next piece, the fact that BD bisects angle ABC. So ABC is that whole big angle up here, which means if I'm going to bisect that angle, it means that those two smaller angles that make it up are going to be congruent. So that's going to be angle ABD is congruent to angle DBC. And that's because of a definition of an angle bisector. An angle bisector cuts an angle into two congruent angles. And again, the two triangles share a common side. The common side that they share is going to be that side DB. So again, we'll say that DB is congruent to DB because of the reflexive property. And now I have enough information to prove the triangles are congruent. I have a side, I have an angle, and I have another side. So for my last step, triangle ABD is going to be congruent to triangle CBD. And again, the whole reason that that is happening is because of side, angle, side. And our last one for today, we have BD is perpendicular to AC, and that AB is congruent to CB, and we want to prove that triangle ADB is congruent to triangle CDB. So again, this is kind of done out for you already. It would have little things popping up on the smartboard, but converting it to a PD, they're all here already. Hey, I don't like writing that in there. You'll never see that written anywhere. Okay, but really what they were doing is lazy man's way of saying all this goes here. Okay, so BD is perpendicular to AC and AB is congruent to CB. And the reason that is because it's given. Do not ever write all there. Okay, you will not get credit for it. Okay, so again, from that given, again, AB is congruent to CB. And then the next thing that they did in step 2 is they're taking care of the perpendicular lines. So they are going to say that angle 1 and angle 2 are right angles. I'm going to put a 1 and a 2 in the picture because they're not there. Okay, so let's call that a 1 and a 2. So 1 and a 2 are right angles. Why is that? Definition of perpendicular lines. Okay. And then they say in step 3, now they're telling me that angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. Okay, well, in step 2, I know that they're right angles. So if one of them is 90 degrees, the other one has to be 90 degrees. So for step 3, I'm going to say that they're congruent. So angle 1 is congruent to angle 2 because right angles are congruent. Okay, and then the next step that they have is BD is congruent to BD. And again, anytime that you have something that's congruent to itself, that's going to be the reflexive property. The next thing that they did was they said that triangle ADB and triangle CDB are right triangles. Why is that? Definition of right triangles. Right triangles has one right angle in it. So again, you have a right angle on the left and a right angle on the right. Okay, so once you know that you have your right triangles, again, if I tried to look at this without saying that those are right angles, this would be angle, side, side. You cannot do angle, side, side. But knowing that these are right triangles, now I can say instead, I have the side opposite the right angle, which is going to be your hypotenuse. And then I have one side of the triangle, that's a leg. So the two triangles are going to be congruent because of hypotenuse leg. And again, that's abbreviated HL. Hypotenuse leg is congruent to hypotenuse leg. Don't forget you have a quiz after this section.